Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of extreme precision. Like you break your arm, you go to the hospital, they take an X-ray, and that jagged white line just shows up on the film.
Right. Yeah, it's entirely binary.
Exactly. The doctor just points to it, says, there it is. That's the problem.
Broken or not broken.
And it's comforting. I mean, we desperately like things to be visible. We want them to be categorized, measurable, and, well, cleanly solvable.
It gives us a sense of control over our environment, I mean.
But what happens when the absolute best analysts in the world, and we are talking about the highest levels of the Pentagon here, try to take an X-ray of an unidentified anomalous phenomenon, a UFO, and the machine doesn't show a nuts and bolts spaceship?
Right, the data doesn't fit the picture.
Yeah. What happens when the diagnostic imaging comes back and the seasoned intelligence operative looking at it realizes he isn't looking at extraterrestrial engineering, but at a literal demon?
That is the exact moment of catastrophic ontological shock that we're unpacking today.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a profound and, frankly, chilling paradigm shift that is currently happening within the highest, most classified levels of the intelligence community.
It's a massive shift.
We're looking at a comprehensive analysis that completely discards the idea of little green men from Mars, and instead, it connects modern UAP encounters to something far older, far more invasive, and honestly, far darker: clinical demonology.
Yeah, which is quite the leap.
Now, before we go a single step further, I need to make a very crucial disclaimer to you, the listener.
This is vital context for what we are about to discuss.
Absolutely. The source material we're diving into, it touches on highly charged religious, political, and philosophical concepts. I mean, we are going to be talking about everything from classified government intelligence operations to traditional Catholic demonology and exorcisms.
Right.
So I want to be explicitly clear right up front. Neither of us is taking a side here. We are not endorsing these religious viewpoints. We are not preaching a theology to you, and we certainly aren't making political statements.
Precisely. We're analyzing this purely as a sociological and intelligence phenomenon.
Exactly. Our job today is to impartially report on the fascinating, terrifying framework presented in our sources. We're treating this document strictly as an intellectual exploration of how seasoned intelligence professionals are attempting to understand an inexplicable threat.
We're looking at the behavioral data and the frameworks these analysts are using, completely regardless of our own personal cosmologies.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why the Pentagon is suddenly looking at exorcism manuals, we really have to understand the old rule book first.
The extraterrestrial hypothesis.
Yes. For the longest time, when the government or the public thought about UFOs, they used a very specific, very safe lens. Can you explain the extraterrestrial hypothesis and why it's suddenly falling apart at the seams?
I can. So for the better part of 7 decades, the foundational analytical framework applied to UAPs by government bodies, scientific institutions, the general public, it was rooted entirely in the extraterrestrial hypothesis, which is widely known as the ETH. The ETH is the idea that this phenomenon is fundamentally material in nature.
Meaning, like, it's stuff we can touch, it's matter.
Exactly. It posits that we are dealing with nuts and bolts aerospace craft. These craft are manufactured, and they are piloted by biological entities, aliens who originated from other physical star systems in our universe.
Right, like they flew here from Alpha Centauri or something.
Yeah, exactly. And crucially, under the ETH, these entities operate within the standard parameters of classical physics and evolutionary biology.
Okay.
I mean, they might be thousands of years ahead of us technologically, but they are still flesh and blood. They are just from a different zip code.
Right. If they're biological, they need sustenance. If they're flying a ship, that ship needs a propulsion system, it needs a navigation computer, it travels through linear space from point A to point B. It's the classic sci-fi movie standard.
It's what we expect.
And honestly, from a military perspective, that's a very comforting thought.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if it's a machine, it has the thermal signature. If it has a thermal signature, a missile can track it. In theory, you can shoot it down.
You've hit the nail on the head. The ETH keeps the phenomenon within the realm of human manageability. It keeps it within the domain of the Department of Defense's existing threat matrix.
It's an enemy we can understand.
Right. But as the longitudinal data surrounding UAP encounters has grown exponentially over the decades, a profound paradigm shift has quietly occurred within highly specialized circles of the intelligence community and aerospace defense sectors.
Because the theory just isn't holding up.
No, the ETH is increasingly recognized as critically insufficient. It is simply failing to explain the data.
But why is it failing? Like, what exactly is the data doing that breaks a standard physics model?
It breaks down because of a concept researchers call high strangeness.
High strangeness.
Yeah, so the longitudinal data, meaning data collected over long periods, tracking the same witnesses and geographical hotspots, it shows that these phenomena do not just act like advanced airplanes. They exhibit psychic manifestations. They show distinct interdimensional characteristics. They manipulate human consciousness directly.
Wow.
I mean, they completely defy classical physics. We are talking about entities appearing seamlessly through solid walls, manipulating the witness's perception of time, and deliberately altering the deep-seated religious and philosophical belief systems of the people who encounter them.
So it's not a spaceship.
No, this isn't just an advanced anti-gravity drive. It's an intelligence that operates on a consciousness-based or even theological level.
And this brings us to the internal crisis within the government. This is where it gets into the ontological shock we mentioned earlier. There's this massive revelation regarding Luis Elizondo, right?
Yes, the former director of ATIP.
Right, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program,
Yeah.
which was a real funded program inside the Pentagon investigating these things. And Elizondo revealed something that honestly is absolutely wild.
It really is.
He said that powerful, high-ranking factions within the Department of Defense actively tried to shut his UAP investigations down entirely. And not because they thought UFOs were fake,
No.
and not because it was a waste of taxpayer money, but because of profound religious terror.
Yes. The specific phrasing used by these defense factions is chilling, especially when you consider who is saying it.
High-level officials.
Exactly. They explicitly asserted that Elizondo and his investigators were doing, quote, the devil's work.
Unbelievable.
They had looked at the high strangeness data, the manipulation of consciousness, the absurdity of the encounters, and they concluded that these phenomena were fundamentally demonic in origin.
And this isn't just an isolated incident of religious panic in the United States either, right?
No, elements within the UK government share this exact view. They believe the phenomenon is real, it's present, but it is intrinsically demonic.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic here. I have to push back. Wait, you're telling me that top-tier intelligence guys in the Pentagon, people whose entire professional lives are dedicated to cold, hard logic, people trained to analyze Soviet satellite telemetry and geopolitical threat matrices, they are looking at UFO data and saying, yep, that's a literal demon from hell.
I know.
How do they not get laughed out of the room? I mean, it sounds like a bad supernatural thriller.
I completely understand the skepticism. It sounds absurd on its face, but you have to look at the human face of this intelligence community perspective. You have to look at Jim Semivan.
Right. He is a major figure in this analysis.
Semivan is a highly compelling, unavoidable figure here. He is a former operative for the Central Intelligence Agency. He had an extensive career in clandestine operations. He later co-founded to the STARS Academy of Arts and Sciences.
So he's not a fringe guy.
Not at all. He is not a fringe conspiracy theorist operating out of a basement. He is a seasoned, highly respected intelligence veteran. And he didn't just study this phenomenon from a secure desk at Langley. He experienced it.
Right. The details of his encounters are deeply unsettling. I mean, he and his wife had personal anomalous encounters in their own home.
Yes.
We were talking about non-human entities manifesting directly through solid walls into their bedroom.
Exactly. And Semivan, an expert in assessing threats and reading the intentions of adversaries, described these encounters, after consulting with numerous other experts and experiencers, as having a distinctly sinister element.
That phrase, sinister element.
It is the pivot point of this entire shift. When you have a CIA operative saying that the phenomenon is not just strange, but actively sinister, highly manipulative, and deeply entwined with the invasion of human consciousness, you are definitively moving out of the realm of materialist exobiology.
Right. You are no longer studying space travel.
Exactly. You are moving directly into the realm of spiritual warfare.
Let's go back to that cybersecurity team analogy for a second. Imagine you have a team of analysts who are the absolute best in the world at fighting computer viruses. They understand code, they understand server architecture, they know how to build firewalls.
The standard toolkit.
Right. But then, one day, they encounter a new virus.
Yeah.
And they slowly, horrifyingly realize that this virus isn't just a string of code trying to steal credit card numbers. It's actively reading their minds as they journey.
Right.
It's manipulating their reality, making them see screens that aren't there, making them doubt their own memories of what they did 5 minutes ago. that cybersecurity team would suffer immense ontological shock.
Absolutely.
All their textbooks on coding are suddenly useless. Their manuals wouldn't work anymore. So why does a seasoned CIA operative suddenly need a theological lexicon to describe an intelligence threat?
Because, as your analogy perfectly illustrates, when military and intelligence professionals face an adversary that operates primarily by manipulating human perception, generating false realities, and inflicting deep psychological trauma, standard aerospace engineering manuals are essentially paperweights.
They just don't apply.
You simply cannot counter a consciousness-altering, reality-bending threat with radar telemetry and thermal imaging. You need a completely different field manual.
A map of the invisible terrain.
Exactly, and that necessity directly leads us to the most unexpected field manual imaginable, which forms the absolute core of this analysis.
Yes. The text that Samavan and others in the intelligence sphere are pointing to. It's a book published way back in 1976 called Hostage to the Devil by Malachi Martin. And again, I have to stop and ask, why? Why is an intelligence operative, a guy trained in espionage and global security, reading a book about Catholic exorcisms?
It seems incredibly incongruous at first glance, but to understand why, you have to understand who Malachi Martin was. He wasn't just a parish priest writing spooky stories.
Right.
Malachi Martin was an Irish-born former Jesuit priest. He was a brilliant biblical archaeologist, a paleographer, which means he studied ancient writing systems, and he was a professor at the Vatican's Pontifical Biblical Institute.
So an academic heavy hitter.
A massive heavy hitter with deep access to the inner workings of the church. When he published Hostage to the Devil in 1976, he positioned it not as speculative fiction, not as an allegory for mental health, but as a rigorously documented clinical nonfiction account.
He treated it like a medical journal.
Exactly.
He claimed the narratives were based on actual audio recordings of exorcisms, incredibly extensive personal interviews with the exorcists involved, the possessed individuals themselves, and the attending medical and psychiatric professionals who were brought in to rule out natural causes.
Precisely. He approached possession not as a chaotic supernatural event, but as a clinical, observable process. He essentially mapped the pathology of possession.
Oh, wow.
The book is structured around 5 primary, exhaustively detailed case studies, and Martin specifically chose these 5 cases because they represent different vectors of vulnerability. They showed the diverse methodologies of non-human infiltration.
Let's talk about these vectors, because instead of just listing them, looking at the spectrum of who gets targeted is what makes this so terrifying.
It is broad.
For example, one case is called Zio's Friend and the Smiler. This involves a 26-year-old woman from New York. And what's crucial here is that she came from a thoroughly normal, orthodox Catholic background. She wasn't playing with Ouija boards. She wasn't dabbling in the occult.
Right, which proves to the intelligence analyst that the phenomenon's targeting parameters are incredibly broad. Even individuals with seemingly robust, normal, societal, and religious foundations can be targeted if the right psychological leverage is found.
And then you contrast her with another case, Father Bones and Mr. Natch. This one involves a young Catholic priest. But his vulnerability wasn't a lack of faith, it was intellectual arrogance.
Yes.
He became fascinated with evolutionary consciousness, which we're going to dive deeply into in a moment. But then the cases get even darker. You have Uncle Ponto and the Mushroom Super, which is about generational targeting.
The entities seem to be hunting this man practically from birth, an inherited spiritual vulnerability.
Right.
You also have The Virgin and the Girl Fixer, a highly disturbing case involving deep themes of human sexuality, gender identity, and the severe manipulation of bodily autonomy. And finally, The Rooster and the Tortoise, exploring deep psychological fragmentation and the total crushing subjugation of the human will.
It's a complete spectrum of human experience. Yeah. But I mean, what does this variety actually tell an intelligence analyst?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it tells them the phenomenon is highly adaptive. But more importantly, while the book documents all the visceral supernatural phenomena you'd expect from a Hollywood movie, levitation, telekinesis, superhuman strength, xenoglossy, which is speaking unlearned ancient languages fluently.
Right, the scary stuff.
Yeah. But the true analytical value for the CIA or the DoD lies in Martin's exhaustive deconstruction of the process. Martin explicitly rejected the idea that these victims were merely suffering from undiagnosed psychiatric conditions like severe schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorder.
And I think this is a vital distinction, he fully acknowledged that the demonic intelligence actively mimics and exploits underlying mental illness to camouflage its presence, right?
Yes, it hides in the noise of actual psychological distress, making it mathematically indigestible to secular observers and medical
It
professionals.
uses human pathology as camouflage.
Exactly. But Martin's core thesis, which completely upended how analysts view the UAP threat, is that possession is not chaotic. It is not a random lightning strike. It is a highly structured, deliberate, almost bureaucratic process of cognitive compromise.
A bureaucratic process.
Yes. The phenomenon does not just force itself upon an unwilling human host through sheer kinetic dominance. It requires a subtle, ongoing form of permission. It utilizes deceit, sentimentality, and the host's own specific cognitive blind spots to gain access.
It's exactly like a phishing scam in cybersecurity.
That's a great way to look at it.
The entity, the hacker, doesn't try to brute force break down the firewall of your mind. They send you an email that looks like it's from your bank or from a friend, playing on your specific fears or your deepest desires. They trick you into willingly typing in your password and handing over the keys.
Yes, exactly.
They need your permission, however subtle or misguided, to get in. But that immediately begs the question, if they need our permission, how do they pick who to target? What makes someone vulnerable to a psychic phishing scam?
Well, they look for a very specific, cultivated psychological environment within the target. And this moves our discussion into the sociological and philosophical heart of Martin's entire work, the concept of the aspiring vacuum.
The aspiring vacuum. Okay, we need to spend some serious time here, because this concept seems to bridge the gap between 1970s Catholic theology and modern secular UAP abductees perfectly. Explain the aspiring vacuum to me.
To understand the aspiring vacuum, we have to borrow a concept from Aristotle, the idea of telos.
Telos.
Telos is a Greek term that means an ultimate object, an aim, or a guiding purpose. For example, the telos of an acorn is to become an oak tree. That is its inherent intended end. According to Martin, human beings require a profound moral and spiritual telos to orient their free will. When that is absent, you have an aspiring vacuum.
The void.
Exactly. It is the absence of clearly defined, humanly acceptable goals for the human will. These predatory entities specifically seek out human beings who are, essentially, beings unto nothing in particular.
So someone who's just drifting.
But drifting in a very profound sense. They are individuals who are isolated from natural human associations, deep traditions, and the familial bonds that normally anchor and orient the human psyche.
It's like the immune system. Think about the human body. We are surrounded by bacteria and viruses constantly, but we don't get sick every day because we have an immune system. A society without a telos, without a shared moral framework or deep community bonds, is like a body with no white blood cells.
That's a perfect analogy.
And Martin observed that late 20th century American society was actively generating this vacuum on a mass scale. He called it cultural desolation. The breakdown of traditional families, the collapse of institutional religion, the rise of extreme individualism and moral relativism.
Exactly. The argument is that because modern secular culture insists that traditional views of good and evil are just outdated, restrictive superstitions, people are left completely without a defensive epistemological framework. They've dismantled their own shields.
They have no cultural immune system left. And this translates seamlessly into the UAP encounters.
It really does.
Researchers who have spent decades investigating the UAP contactee community have noted a striking pattern. A massive percentage of abductees describe a deep pre-existing sense of alienation. They felt a lack of earthly belonging or a profound spiritual void long before their first anomalous encounter in the woods or their bedroom.
They are already living deep inside the aspiring vacuum. And then right on cue, the UAP phenomenon steps right into that void.
It feels it.
It acts as a cosmic savior, presents itself as a space brother. It brings these grandiose messianic messages about ecological collapse or nuclear war or human evolution. Jim Semivan explicitly refers to this kind of encounter as a theophany, a profound, disruptive, almost religious experience orchestrated by the phenomenon. The UAP steps in and gives the isolated experiencer a telos. It gives them a cosmic purpose.
You are the chosen one. You're going to help us save the Earth.
Precisely. But as Martin repeatedly, vehemently warns, this newfound purpose is entirely deceptive. It is a Trojan horse. It is ultimately subservient to the alien intelligence, and its sole purpose is rendering the human host into a captive, willing biological instrument.
And this isn't just theory. The sources give us a massive, detailed narrative from Martin's book to illustrate exactly how this spiritual compromise actually happens in real time. And what's terrifying is that it rarely begins with blatant evil. It doesn't start with someone sacrificing an animal in the woods.
No, not usually.
It begins with narcissism. It begins with intellectual pride. Let's talk about the tragic descent of Father Jonathan.
The case of Father Jonathan is perhaps the most crucial for intelligence analysts trying to understand the UAP experiencer movement. Father Jonathan was a priest, but he didn't seek out the demonic in any traditional occult sense. He drifted into what Martin describes as a false New Age understanding of his faith. He became deeply infected with the evolutionary theology of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
Okay, we need to pause and explain Teilhard de Chardin, because I hear this name thrown around in modern spiritual circles constantly. What is this evolutionary theology, and why does Martin consider it an open door to possession?
Well, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was a French Jesuit priest, a paleontologist, and a philosopher. He developed a highly controversial mystical view of evolution. He believed that the universe was evolving not just physically but spiritually towards a state of supreme consciousness he called the omega point.
The omega point.
Yes, he essentially blended evolutionary biology with mysticism. He posited that humanity was collectively evolving into a higher spiritual plane, a new sphere of shared cosmic consciousness.
On the surface, that sounds beautiful. It sounds like unity.
It does sound beautiful, which is why it is so dangerous, according to Martin's framework. The problem with Teilhardian theology from an orthodox perspective is that it blurs all the hard lines. It starts viewing traditional binary concepts of good and evil, of sin and redemption, as too restrictive, too small-minded for an evolving cosmic citizen.
Ah, I see.
Father Jonathan started stripping away his traditional defensive fabric of faith. He stopped believing in a personal God with moral laws and instead sought a broader cosmic energy. He wanted to participate in an evolutionary leap in consciousness. He sought a generalized spiritual presence.
So he dismantled his own firewall because he thought the firewall was keeping him from evolving.
Yes.
He systematically broke down his own psychological and spiritual defenses in pursuit of this vague Teilhardian mystery. And Martin explicitly warns that seeking energy or presence without strict moral boundaries, without a defined telos of what is fundamentally good and what is fundamentally evil, is the exact mechanic of psychic invasion.
It leaves the door wide open.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The parallels to modern UFO culture become undeniable here. You look at the New Age movement, you look at UFO cults, you look at the experiencer communities today. They are constantly channeling entities that claim to be pure light or pure consciousness. They say they are here to offer DNA upgrades or to usher humanity into the fifth dimension. They use the exact same evolutionary vocabulary that hooked Father Jonathan.
It's the exact same script.
But I have to push back again. Aren't human beings naturally curious? We want to evolve. We want to understand the universe. We want to expand our consciousness. Why is the pursuit of cosmic knowledge viewed here as a dangerous trap, rather than just natural, beautiful human evolution?
It's the most important question to ask. The danger does not lie in the curiosity itself. The danger lies in the bypassing of human reason. These entities, whether you view them as demons or interdimensional tricksters, actively utilize humanity's natural evolutionary aspirations, our genuine scientific curiosity, and our spiritual thirst as the very vectors for their covert infiltration.
So they use our best traits against us.
Exactly. They present as an angel of light specifically to bypass our natural, rational defense mechanisms. When Father Jonathan yielded his free will to the entity, he did it because the entity promised him a superior intellectual vantage point. It promised him he would be part of the cosmic elite.
Just like the UAP experiencers.
Yes. UAP experiencers yield their will because the phenomenon promises hidden knowledge, what ancient cultures called gnosis, and elevated status among humanity. The curiosity isn't the problem. The willing, enthusiastic surrender of critical thinking and moral boundaries in exchange for that forbidden knowledge is the trap.
It's weaponized enlightenment. They offer you the secrets of the universe, and all it costs is your critical thinking and your free will.
Exactly. And that systematic bypassing of reason leads us directly into the codified playbook of how they take complete control. Both Malachi Martin and the renowned psychiatrist Dr. M. Scott Peck, who actually adapted Martin's models for clinical psychiatric use, identified a highly predictable sequential process of possession. It's a 6-stage subversion campaign.
And the analysis we have explicitly compares these demonic stages side by side with UAP abduction phenomenology.
Yeah.
But instead of just listing them out like a textbook, let's walk through what this actually looks and feels like for a target.
Let's start with the breach. Stage 1 is initial entry. In Martin's clinical framework, this is the opening of a doorway. It requires a subtle permission. A person might engage in an occult practice or perhaps make a willful, deep moral transgression that fractures their psyche.
What does that look like physically?
Physically, it manifests as a sudden, inexplicable drop in ambient temperature, and an undeniable, heavy alien presence is distinctly felt in the room.
And we see this exact same opening move in UAP encounters. It's the initial encounter in the woods or driving down a lonely highway. The abductee feels a profound sense of an alien presence watching them. It's almost always accompanied by severe environmental changes. UAP researchers call it the Oz factor.
The Oz factor,
The
yeah.
crickets stop chirping, the wind dies down, the environment feels artificially isolated, and there's often missing time.
Once the entry is made, the phenomenon moves to isolate the target. Stage 2 is erroneous judgments. In a possession case, Martin notes that the host starts making highly detrimental, irrational life decisions. The entity actively alters their perception of reality, making friends look like enemies and enemies look like friends. It isolates them from their familial support networks.
The UAP parallel is identical. The experiencer becomes completely obsessed with the phenomenon. Their traditional relationships break down. Marriages end. Careers are abandoned. The experiencer starts acting on intrusive telepathic compulsions from the UAP, believing they are receiving special instructions that outsiders just wouldn't understand.
Which brings us to the critical turning point. Stage 3, voluntary yielding. The host, worn down and isolated, formally yields control of their will to the alien force. They falsely believe that surrendering is the only way to find peace, or that the entity will ultimately help them evolve. They relinquish their sovereign free will.
In UAP literature, this is the psychological Stockholm Syndrome phase. Early in the abduction cycle, the experiencer is terrified, but eventually they stop resisting. They begin to actively believe that the non-human intelligence, despite traumatizing them, is operating for the greater good of humanity or for their own personal spiritual ascension. They start defending their captors.
Once the will is yielded, the entity solidifies its camouflage. Stage 4 is pretense. In possession, the entity hides within the host. It acts as the host to deceive outsiders, psychiatrists, and priests. It masks its malevolent, parasitic nature behind a veneer of normality or often false spiritual enlightenment.
The UAP parallel to this pretense is truly chilling. This is when the entity begins to communicate through the experiencer what the New Age community calls channeling. The abductee will channel platitudes of profound cosmic peace, universal love, and ecological harmony, while simultaneously, behind the scenes, they are being subjected to brutal physiological trauma and covert psychological manipulation by the very entities they are praising.
But eventually, the camouflage drops. Stage 5 is the break point. The pretense ends. The entity fully, violently reveals its alien nature, and the human host loses complete control over their own body and mind. The entity speaks directly, often exhibiting supernatural knowledge or xenoglossy.
For the UAP abductee, this is the point of acute psychological breakdown, the total assimilation of their life. They suffer profound periods of missing time where they have no idea what they did. Alternate non-human personalities may manifest. Their motor functions are completely hijacked during encounters. They describe their bodies moving against their will, controlled by a puppet master.
And finally, stage 6, clash and expulsion. For Martin, this is the titanic, violent struggle of the exorcism itself. The host, aided by the exorcist, has to use whatever remains of their restored free will to forcefully sever the connection. It is highly dangerous, both psychologically and physically.
In the UAP world, this represents the desperate attempt by the experiencer to finally break contact. Researchers have documented that using intense cognitive behavioral therapy, or even strict spiritual resistance, such as invoking religious figures or demanding autonomy, can sometimes terminate the abductions. But it requires immense, sustained willpower, and it almost always brings severe psychological and even physical backlash from the entities who do not want to let their host go.
Now, those 6 stages outline a process of traditional possession. There is eventually a visible, violent conflict between the human host and the invader. The system fights the virus. But the analysis we are reading introduces one of Martin's most terrifying advanced concepts. It's a concept that finds a deeply unsettling, almost invisible parallel in UAP studies: perfect possession.
Perfect possession, also known as diabolical subjugation. This is where the horror truly sets in. Explain what makes perfect possession different from the violent exorcisms we see in movies.
Unlike normal possession, which is violent, recognizable, and chaotic, involving physical spasms, profanity, physical revulsion to sacred objects, Perfect possession is entirely silent.
Yeah.
In perfect possession, the human host has entirely and willingly aligned their own free will with the will of the entity. The internal conflict completely ceases. The human and the parasite are in perfect conscious symbiosis.
The analysis points out that individuals who are perfectly possessed appear completely, utterly normal to the outside world. In fact, they are often highly successful, exceptionally charismatic, and deeply persuasive leaders in society. The entity doesn't need to thrash the human body around or make it speak in ancient tongues because it has achieved absolute, uncontested control over the host's will, their resources, and their societal influence.
It's the ultimate infiltration.
I have to connect this to the deep UAP lore because the analogy is flawless. In UAP circles, people constantly debate the idea of hybrids or walk-ins, the idea that there are fully assimilated human agents operating seamlessly in human society to advance an alien agenda.
Yes, it's a very common theory.
Think about it like this. Normal possession is like a kinetic military invasion. There are bombs going off, people are screaming, the tanks are rolling down the street. It's obvious to everyone that an attack is happening. But perfect possession is a silent, corporate, hostile takeover from the inside. The board of directors is quietly replaced, the company policies change to serve a new master, but the company logo on the building stays exactly the same. The public never knows a difference.
That's a terrifyingly accurate way to put it.
But this raises a massive problem for the intelligence community. If these entities, or the humans they perfectly possess, are perfectly camouflaged in society, how does an observer or an intelligence analyst at the CIA even know they are dealing with an anomaly? How do you spot the invisible enemy?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you spot them not through their use of physical force, but through the deliberate generation of extreme, mathematically impossible confusion. That is the ultimate tactical signature of the phenomenon. And this brings us to the weaponization of confusion and the archetype of the trickster.
The trickster. Jim Semivan talks about this explicitly. He noted a constant, unavoidable leitmotif of trickery and deceit woven into almost every genuine UAP encounter.
And Semivan is heavily backed up by seminal UAP researchers like John Keel, the author of the Mothman Prophecies. Keel didn't just read reports, he spent years doing exhaustive, on-the-ground field research, and he concluded that the primary modus operandi of the phenomenon is not to educate us and not to conquer us physically, but to generate extreme, debilitating confusion. His explicit quote is that their goal is to make people think they are nuts.
Right.
Keel argued that these entities, which he termed ultra-terrestrials rather than extraterrestrials, actively alter their physical presentation based entirely on our cultural expectations. They are chameleons. They show up as fairies and goblins in the Middle Ages, as demons and succubi in the Renaissance, as airships in the 1800s, and as sleek, metallic extraterrestrial spacecraft today. They do this to keep human civilization in a constant state of ontological instability. They never let us get a firm grip on what they actually are.
And Malachi Martin, studying Catholic exorcisms in the 1970s, arrived at the exact same tactical conclusion regarding the demonic hierarchy. He wrote, quote, "One basic note of possession is confusion. Confusion, it would seem, is a prime weapon of evil. The entity actively lures humans into a booby-trap reality specifically to burn the very roots of their deductive reason. And the primary tool they use to generate this confusion is the absurd."
The absurd, yes.
I love the specific example the analysis brings up here. It's bizarre, it sounds funny at first, but it perfectly illustrates the psychological warfare at play. It's the famous Joe Simonton case. This isn't just folklore. This was actually investigated by the U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book. A witness encounters a highly advanced, futuristic, metallic spacecraft. It lands in his yard. The occupants come out, looking like humanoids. They ask the witness for a glass of water, and in exchange, they hand him a stack of warm, saltless pancakes.
It is entirely profoundly absurd.
It's hilarious. I mean, pancakes. But it's terrifying when you understand why it's happening. Explain the cognitive mechanics of the absurd. What happens to the human brain when an alien hands you a pancake?
The absurd is used as a highly sophisticated cognitive control mechanism. When a human mind encounters an anomaly, it immediately tries to categorize it. It uses deductive reasoning. Is this a threat? Is this a machine? Is this an animal? But when you encounter a highly advanced, physics-defying spacecraft and the occupant asks for water and gives you a pancake, your deductive reasoning completely short-circuits. Cognitive dissonance sets in. The brain cannot reconcile the high-tech reality with the absurd action.
It paralyzes the analytical mind.
Exactly. It creates a state of profound ontological shock. And systematically, this makes the phenomenon mathematically and bureaucratically indigestible to rigid institutions like the CIA, the Pentagon, or mainstream academia. You cannot put a pancake-making alien into a neat intelligence threat matrix. You can't write a defense policy against it. The absurdity protects the phenomenon from serious institutional investigation. It acts as an impenetrable shield of ridicule.
Martin's text demonstrates that these intelligences have always utilized paradox and absurdity as their primary defensive perimeter. It ensures that any human attempting to strictly quantify their behavior will either be driven toward irrational obsession or complete despair. But the phenomenon isn't just confusing. It exhibits a physical contagion. It spreads. Let's talk about the hitchhiker effect.
This is where the phenomenon becomes a tangible, physical threat to personnel. The analysis brings up the government-sponsored AAWSAP investigations, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program. This was the Pentagon's multi-million-dollar program that investigated high strangeness at the infamous Skinwalker Ranch in Utah.
All right, the Skinwalker Ranch.
During this program, they rigorously documented what became known as the hitchhiker effect. Highly trained intelligence personnel, physicists, and scientists would go to the ranch, interact with the phenomenon, and then return home. But the anomaly followed them. Poltergeist activity, dark, shadowy figures appearing in hallways, the disembodied movement of objects, and unexplained severe autoimmune ailments started afflicting not just the investigators, but their spouses and children hundreds of miles away.
It acts exactly like a biological virus. You catch it, you bring it home, you infect your family. And the analysis compares this directly, one-to-one, to Martin's strict, terrifying warnings regarding the demonic. Martin explicitly stated that engaging with, investigating, or even just intently observing the demonic actively invites its presence. He warned that even secular police officers investigating ritualistic crimes place themselves in severe spiritual and psychological danger. You cannot just be a passive observer looking through a microscope. The very act of looking opens the door. The phenomenon looks back.
It's a two-way mirror.
Which brings up the intelligence community's incredibly dangerous history with remote viewing. The Stargate Project.
This is a critical point of intersection between espionage and the occult. During the Cold War and stretching into the 90s, U.S. intelligence agencies heavily utilized parapsychology, specifically remote viewing, to gather intelligence on Soviet targets. But it didn't stop there. Major figures in the program, like Major Ed Dames, openly utilized these psychic techniques to attempt to contact what they believed were extraterrestrial intelligences. They were actively reaching out into the void with their minds.
But Malachi Martin vehemently debated these practitioners. He even went on the legendary Art Bell radio show to warn them. Martin argued that psychic espionage serves as a direct occult doorway. He warned that trying to psychically interface with UAPs or non-human intelligences completely bypasses our natural, God-given mental protections. He believed that the military protocols and safeguards these remote viewers claimed to use were entirely illusory. They were trying to build a psychic fence against an ancient, predatory intelligence that predates humanity. He viewed it as inviting subjugation under the naive guise of military protocol.
He saw it as incredibly reckless.
So we've established that their tactics are psychological, viral, and relied heavily on weaponized confusion. But a skeptical analyst is going to ask, is there any hard physical cross-domain evidence that actually ties these 1970s Catholic exorcisms in urban apartments to modern alien encounters in the woods? Is there physical proof they are the same thing? And the analysis provides an incredible, deeply unsettling breakdown of the physical phenomenology. The sensory overlaps.
The cross-domain phenomenology is undeniably striking. The analyst lists several specific categories where the physical overlaps are impossible to ignore. First, we look at the olfactory and atmospheric markers. In Martin's clinical demonology, the manifestation of an entity is consistently accompanied by sudden, inexplicable drops in room temperature, often localized to a specific corner of a room, and overpowering phantom smells. Specifically, the smell of ozone, raw excrement, sulfur, or burning putrefaction.
And when you dive into the UAP abduction literature, witnesses report the exact same sensory details upon craft proximity or entity manifestation. A sudden, terrifying chill in the air, accompanied by the overwhelming stench of sulfur, ozone, or burning electrical wiring. It's the same atmospheric signature.
Then there are the kinetic anomalies. Martin's possession cases feature human levitation, preternatural superhuman strength, and violent telekinesis objects flying across the room. The UAP literature is similarly saturated with poltergeist activity. the disembodied movement of objects in the experiencer's home, and the terrifying accounts of floating abductees being levitated right through solid barriers, walls, or closed glass windows.
But the morphological overlaps, the actual physical visual descriptions of the entities themselves, are where my jaw completely hit the floor reading this analysis. The report focuses heavily on the reptilian interface. Anyone who has spent 5 minutes looking into modern UAP lore knows it is absolutely saturated with reports of reptilian entities. Abductees describe cold, ancient, emotionless, lizard-like non-human intelligences.
Yes.
And then you open Malachi Martin's clinical descriptions of Catholic exorcisms from the 1970s. During these extreme rites, the possessing entity would occasionally break its psychological camouflage and manifest visually to the people in the room. I'm going to read the exact quotes from Martin's text because they are chilling. Martin describes an entity manifesting during an exorcism with, quote, the face of some amphibian creature, like that of a newt, a golem-like creature. It seemed like the most primitive creature I had ever seen. And later in the same exorcism, he writes, quote, the face appeared to be that of a very dry, thick-skinned, lizard-like creature, possibly an iguana, definitely a reptile.
It's the exact same description.
Think about the implications of this. You have a highly trained former CIA operative like Jim Semivan. He is processing raw, modern intelligence data. He is reading classified contactee reports of ancient, manipulative reptilian entities operating advanced craft. And then he reads a 1970s account of Catholic exorcism in a cramped urban apartment. And the visual description of the demon is absolutely identical. It is logically impossible for an intelligence operative to ignore that visual consistency across decades, across completely different contexts, and across totally different belief systems.
It is the exact same visual interface being deployed, but the physical overlaps go into even darker, more invasive territory. We must address the deeply transgressive nature of both phenomena. UAP abductees, as rigorously researched by the late Pulitzer Prize-winning Harvard psychiatrist Dr. John Mack and prominent authors like Whitley Strieber, routinely report horrifying forced reproductive procedures.
The non-consensual harvesting of genetic material, the extraction of sperm and eggs.
Yes, and profound psychic and sexual manipulation. Both Dr. Mack and Strieber drew explicit, heavily documented parallels between these modern UAP accounts and historical medieval texts regarding succubi and incubi demons that assault humans sexually in their sleep.
And the analysis points out that Martin's clinical work partakes deeply in this specific horrifying pathology. The majority of the possession cases detailed in Hostage to the Devil involve graphic sexual transgression, the profound manipulation of the host's sexual identity, and the harvesting of human energy through sexual degradation. Martin actually quotes a possessing entity communicating directly to a human host, whispering, "There's no point in making love. You have all that human love can give you, and much more."
It's incredibly predatory.
So what does this all mean? When you look at the genetic harvesting of the UFO phenomena and the sexual subjugation of the demonic, you realize the phenomenon is aggressively trying to replace healthy, horizontal human-to-human intimacy with a vertical, parasitical dependency on the entity itself. It wants to be the only relationship you have.
It demands total isolation.
Right. But if they aren't actually reproducing in a biological sense, which the interdimensional consciousness-based theory strongly suggests they aren't, what are they actually trying to achieve? What is the end goal of this cosmic parasite?
To answer that, we have to look past the physical transgressions, past the absurdity and the floating objects, and understand their ultimate terrifying teleology, their final goal. This brings us to the ultimate strategic implications of this entire analysis. The standard extraterrestrial hypothesis assumes a physical motive. The aliens are here because their planet died, they want our resources, they need our water, or they are just conducting neutral scientific data collection on our genetics.
The sci-fi movie plot.
Right. But the interdimensional demonological framework posits a purely predatory spiritual teleology. According to Martin's exhaustive lifelong research, the goal of these entities is not the physical destruction of the planet. It is not nuclear war. It is, quote, the great loss in human quality, in humanness.
The eradication of humanness.
Exactly. The entity systematically seeks to sever the targeted individual from all natural human associations. It cuts them off from empathy, from love, from charity, from familial bonds. It hollows them out until what is left is a cold, mechanistic, deeply isolated consciousness that perfectly mirrors the entity itself.
Which perfectly, tragically aligns with what legendary UAP researchers like Jacques Vallée and John Keel observed after decades in the field. They noted that prolonged, intense UAP exposure hollows out the witness. It erases their original personality, their warmth, their humor. It leaves them fanatically devoted to the cosmic agenda of the entities. They become empty vessels, human drones.
This raises an important question regarding national security. If you are an intelligence analyst sitting in the Pentagon and you realize there is an adversary capable of quietly, invisibly hollowing out the humanity of an operational target, a political leader, or an entire segment of the population without ever once triggering an early warning radar system that represents an existential threat of the highest possible order. It bypasses all conventional military defenses because it operates entirely within the invisible, unquantifiable domain of human consciousness and spiritual vulnerability.
But there is a necessary caveat that the analysis brings up, what they call an epistemological translation issue. And it's important we address this. Malachi Martin's book and his entire worldview is strictly bound to pre-Vatican II Roman Catholicism. Let's explain what that means quickly. Vatican II was a major council in the 1960s that modernized the Catholic Church. It translated the Mass from Latin to local languages, and it softened some of the rigid medieval rhetoric regarding spiritual warfare to be more ecumenical and modern. Martin violently rejected this modernization. He believed the strict, ancient, rigid binary of good and evil, the Old Latin rites, was the only accurate map of the spiritual battlefield. He believed only Christ could defeat these entities, and critics point out he could be extremely polarizing and rigidly dogmatic.
He was definitely controversial.
So, if you are a secular CIA analyst or a military strategist who might be an atheist or Buddhist or agnostic, how do you use this incredibly Catholic framework without having to convert?
The analysis addresses this translation issue brilliantly. The intelligence community understands that you do not have to adopt the religious cosmology to utilize the behavioral data. Demonology, in this highly specific analytical context, serves as an ancient, highly detailed open-source intelligence database.
Open source intel.
Yes, think of it this way. Shamans, exorcists, indigenous elders, and ancient spiritual traditions have spent millennia meticulously mapping the behavior, the tactics, and the psychological profiles of manipulative, predatory, non-human intelligences. They documented it all.
Yeah.
Whether modern analysts choose to call them demons, ultra-terrestrials, tricksters, or interdimensional interlopers, the behavioral profile of the enemy remains absolutely identical.
The label doesn't matter.
Right. Martin's text provides the intelligence community with a high-fidelity, battle-tested psychological profile of a non-human adversary. The tactical mechanisms of attack, the exploitation of the aspiring vacuum, the weaponization of the absurd, the 6 stages of cognitive subjugation. These mechanics function exactly the same, regardless of the ontological label you slap on the entity. The map works, even if you disagree on who drew it.
Wow. Okay. We've covered an absolutely massive amount of ground today. Let's synthesize this profound journey for you, the listener. We started by discarding the failing nuts and bolts theory of UFOs, the X-ray machine that simply couldn't capture the whole terrifying picture. We moved through the intelligence community's profound ontological shock, realizing that the Pentagon's best minds believed they might be dealing with a fundamentally sinister element. We explored Malachi Martin's unlikely clinical field manual on exorcism, deeply understanding how the phenomenon exploits the aspiring vacuum in our modern secular culture to gain subtle permission.
We walked through a lot.
We really did. We walked through the chillingly identical stages of demonic possession and UAP abduction. We explored the brilliant, paralyzing weaponization of absurdity with saltless pancakes. We looked at the viral contagion of the hitchhiker effect at Skinwalker Ranch, the dangers of psychic doorways, and those undeniable, terrifying visual overlaps of reptilian entities manifesting in both UFO encounters and urban exorcisms. And finally, we arrived at the ultimate predatory threat, the systematic eradication of human empathy and the hollowing out of human consciousness.
It's a sobering picture.
It is. In a world that is increasingly dealing with severe information overload, profound secular isolation, and a desperate, widespread search for cosmic meaning, this source material acts as a massive, blinking warning sign. It challenges you to violently guard your critical thinking. It demands that we recognize that not everything offering enlightenment or cosmic energy or hidden knowledge actually has human interests at heart. Sometimes the light at the end of the tunnel is a lure. Yes. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over long after this deep dive ends. We've spent this entire time discussing how this ancient intelligence exploits the aspiring vacuum, our lack of profound purpose, our increasing isolation, our loss of a guiding telos. We usually think the defense against an advanced non-human intelligence requires better aerospace technology, stronger radar systems, or global military alliances. We want to build a better weapon.
Physical defenses.
But if this phenomenon operates fundamentally by consuming our free will, isolating us from our families, and eradicating our empathy, what if the ultimate impenetrable defense against this cosmic predator isn't a weapon at all? What if the absolute best way to defend humanity is simply to relentlessly cultivate deep, meaningful relationships, unyielding empathy, and a profound earthly purpose in our everyday lives? What if the only cure for the diagnostic muddy waters isn't a better X-ray machine, but a deeper, more profound connection to each other? Thank you for joining us on this intense deep dive into the source material.